The laughter came first. Not soft laughter, not the nervous kind people make before a wedding. This one was sharp, careless, like someone laughing at a joke that wasn't meant to be heard by the wrong ears. I had stepped out of the bridal hall to take a call about a contract that refused to wait for my son's wedding day. The corridor behind the church office was quiet, almost empty, and for a moment I thought I had finally found a place where the noise couldn't reach me. Then I heard my son's name. "Evan is too easy," Bianca said, her voice low but clear through the half-closed door. "He doesn't question anything. He just trusts." The way she said the word trust made my hand tighten around my phone. Another voice followed, deeper, amused. Sebastian. I recognized him from earlier introductions, the man she called her stepfather. "Then make it quick," he replied. "You already know what we need." My breath slowed on its own. Years in business had taught me that panic makes people loud, and loud people miss important details. So I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I simply opened the voice recorder on my phone and held it steady near the wall. Bianca laughed again. "His mother is worth $150 million. Once the marriage is official, it's only a matter of time before he gives me access. He already tells me everything." Sebastian's shoes scraped softly against the floor inside. "Debt doesn't wait forever," he muttered. "After the honeymoon, we start moving things." The hallway suddenly felt smaller, not because of fear, but because clarity had a way of closing in on you when truth arrived too quickly. I should have walked away, and any normal mother would have burst into the room, demanded answers, ended everything right there. But I wasn't most people. I kept recording. Bianca's voice dropped, softer now, almost proud. "You worry too much. He's blinded by love. Even his best man tried to warn him and he brushed it off. And after today, everything changes." There was a pause, followed by a rustle of fabric. I shifted slightly closer to the wall, careful not to let my heels echo against the tiles. Sebastian chuckled. "And the baby?" he asked quietly. Silence followed, not long, but heavy enough to feel deliberate. Bianca exhaled slowly. "1 month," she said. "Nobody will notice yet. By the time anyone asks questions, the wedding will already be old news." My fingers tightened around the phone. The words didn't feel real at first, and they hovered in the air like something unfinished, something my mind refused to accept. I stared at the wall in front of me, forcing myself to stay still, to keep breathing evenly so the recording wouldn't catch the sound of a mother breaking. Inside the room, Sebastian laughed again, softer this time, almost affectionate. "Then we're close," he said. "Just smile, say your vows, and let the rest happen naturally." Footsteps shifted toward the door. I ended the recording a second before the handle turned and stepped away from the wall as if I had just arrived there by accident. Bianca opened the door, her face glowing with bridal perfection, eyes bright, lips curved into a practiced smile. "Oh," she said lightly, surprised to see me. "Mrs. Cynthia, I didn't know you were back here." I returned her smile, calm, polite, unreadable. "Just taking a call," I replied, slipping my phone into my purse. Sebastian stood behind her, watching me carefully, his expression harder to read than hers. For a brief second, our eyes met, and I wondered if he sensed anything had changed. If he did, he said nothing. They walked past me toward the main hall, laughter returning as if nothing in the world had shifted, but something had. I remained in the corridor long after their footsteps faded, my reflection staring back at me from the dark glass of a framed notice board. The recording rested quietly inside my purse, heavier than any decision I had ever carried. My son was waiting at the altar, believing he was about to marry a woman who loved him. And somewhere inside that quiet church, a secret had just rewritten the entire day. I turned toward the sanctuary doors, my steps slow, deliberate, because I wasn't walking back as a guest anymore. I was walking back with proof, and a truth that could destroy a wedding before the vows were even spoken. The music inside the bridal suite was louder than it needed to be. Laughter floated through the room, mixed with the soft hiss of hairspray and the rustle of silk. Bridesmaids moved around Bianca like she was the center of a carefully staged painting, adjusting her veil, fixing the train of her gown, whispering compliments that sounded rehearsed. Anyone looking from the outside would have seen nothing but happiness. I stood near the doorway, silent, observing. The recording rested inside my purse, hidden beneath a folded program. I didn't touch it, didn't look at it. Years of experience had taught me something simple. When truth is heavy, you don't rush to drop it. You let it settle until the right moment comes. Bianca caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled brightly. "Mrs. Cynthia," she said sweetly, turning slightly so the light caught the side of her face. "You look so calm. I thought mothers of the groom were supposed to be emotional." "I save my emotions for when they matter," I replied gently. She laughed as if I had made a harmless joke, but I noticed the way her eyes lingered on my purse for half a second too long. Maybe instinct, maybe nothing. Still, I filed it away. A bridesmaid handed her a glass of water. Bianca hesitated before taking it, pressing her palm lightly against her stomach, as though steadying herself. The gesture was subtle, small enough that no one else reacted, but I had heard enough behind that wall to know what it meant. She wasn't nervous about the ceremony, and she was calculating. Sebastian appeared briefly at the doorway, giving Bianca a look that lasted only a second before he disappeared again into the hallway. It was the kind of look most people would miss, too familiar, too confident. But once you knew what lived beneath it, you couldn't unsee it. I stepped away quietly before anyone could pull me into small talk and moved toward the courtyard outside the church. The air was cooler there, calmer. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. "Mrs. Cynthia." I turned to find Reese standing a few steps away, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder. Evan's best man had always carried himself with a quiet steadiness, the kind that didn't need attention to feel strong. "You have a minute?" he asked. "Always," I replied. He hesitated, glancing back toward the entrance to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not proud of how long I waited." I watched him carefully. "Go on." Reese exhaled slowly. "Months ago, I told Evan I didn't trust Bianca. Nothing dramatic, just instincts. The way she asked questions about his investments, his accounts. He thought I was being jealous or overprotective." His jaw tightened. "After that, I stopped pushing. I didn't want to be the friend who ruins a man's happiness." I said nothing, letting him continue. "But today," he added quietly, "something feels wrong. And you look like you already know it." His words lingered between us. I considered telling him everything, the recording, the pregnancy, the plan I had overheard. But panic spreads faster when too many people carry it. And panic makes mistakes. "Reese," I said gently, "you did what you thought was right at the time. That matters more than you think." He searched my face, trying to read what I wasn't saying. "Are you going to stop this wedding?" he asked softly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. I thought of Evan standing somewhere inside that building, adjusting his tie, probably smiling nervously as guests filled the pews. I thought of the laughter I had heard behind that wall. Sharp, careless, cruel. "No," I answered calmly. Reese blinked, surprised. "You're not?" "Not yet," I said. "Some truths need the right moment to be seen clearly." He studied me for a long second, then nodded slowly. Whatever he saw in my expression must have convinced him that I wasn't acting blindly. "If you need anything," he said quietly, "I'm on your side." "I know," I replied. He walked back toward the church, leaving me alone with the sound of distant music drifting through the open doors. I slipped my hand into my purse and felt the edge of my phone beneath my fingers. The recording still there, still waiting. Inside, guests were beginning to take their seats. Bianca would soon walk down the aisle, believing everything was still under her control. I straightened my jacket and turned toward the sanctuary, my steps steady, measured. Because stopping the wedding too early would only create chaos, and chaos would give liars a place to hide. No. If the truth was going to be revealed, it needed to happen where no one could deny it. Not Bianca, not Sebastian, not even my son. I walked back into the church with a quiet decision settling deep inside me. I wasn't here to prevent a ceremony. I was here to let it begin, so the truth could end it. The music rose slowly, filling the sanctuary with a softness that felt almost unreal. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering about the beauty of the flowers, the elegance of the setting, the way sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows and painted warm colors across the pews. To anyone else, it looked like a perfect wedding. The kind people take pictures of and remember without question. But perfection has a strange way of feeling heavy when you already know how fragile it is. I sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in my lap, my purse resting beside me like any ordinary accessory. Inside it, the recording waited quietly, invisible to everyone except me. Around me, relatives smiled, dabbed at their eyes, went and turned their attention toward the aisle as the first notes of the processional began. Evan stood at the altar, shoulders squared, eyes bright with expectation. He looked calm, not the kind of calm that comes from certainty, but the kind that comes from trust. My chest tightened for a brief second, but I forced the feeling down. This was not the moment for hesitation. The doors at the back of the church opened. Bianca stepped forward. She looked flawless. The dress fell perfectly, the veil floating behind her like something out of a painting. Every movement she made was measured, graceful, intentional. Guests murmured softly as she walked, her smile gentle, her posture steady, the image of a bride who believed she owned the room. If I hadn't stood behind that wall earlier, I might have believed it too. Sebastian walked along the side aisle rather than sitting with the rest of the guests, positioning himself where he could see everything clearly. Most people wouldn't have noticed him. Weddings are full of distractions. But I watched him carefully. His hands stayed in his pockets longer than necessary. His gaze shifted from Bianca to Evan and then briefly toward the sound system near the front of the sanctuary, not nervous, anticipating. The way a man looks when he thinks a plan is about to succeed. Bianca reached Evan, and he smiled at her with an openness that felt almost painful to watch. He took her hands gently, whispering something that made her tilt her head as if she were moved. From the outside, they looked like a couple stepping into a new life together. But I had seen the version of her that lived behind closed doors, the one that laughed about trust like it was a weakness. The officiant began speaking, his voice calm and warm, guiding the ceremony forward. Guests settled into silence. Even the air felt still. I shifted slightly in my seat, glancing toward the sound technician positioned near the side wall. He was adjusting a small console, unaware that the most important sound of the day had not yet been played. Sebastian's eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second. He looked away quickly, but it was enough. Something in his expression sharpened, like he sensed movement beneath the surface, even if he couldn't name it. The officiant asked Evan to repeat the first set of vows. Evan's voice carried clearly through the room, steady and sincere, and every word sounded like a promise built on belief. Belief in love, in loyalty, in the future he thought he was stepping into. Bianca watched him closely, nodding at the right moments, her smile perfectly timed. When it was her turn, she spoke softly, her voice trembling just enough to seem emotional. Guests smiled. Someone near the back sniffled quietly. I watched Sebastian instead. His shoulders relaxed as Bianca spoke, as if he felt closer to victory with every word she said. He glanced toward the exit, then back at the altar, calculating distances, timing possibilities. The officiant moved forward, voice lifting slightly. "If anyone here has reason to believe this union should not proceed, speak now." The traditional line hung in the air, light and ceremonial, never meant to be taken seriously. So my fingers brushed the edge of my purse. I didn't stand, not yet. The ceremony continued, building toward the moment that would seal everything legally, publicly, permanently. Bianca squeezed Evan's hands as if she were holding on to something precious. Guests leaned forward, ready for the final exchange. I rose slowly from my seat. The movement was small, almost invisible among the shifting of guests adjusting in their pews. I walked calmly toward the side aisle, heels quiet against the floor, my expression neutral enough that no one questioned me. The sound technician glanced up as I approached. I leaned close, my voice low and steady. "When I nod," I said softly, "play the file I'm about to send you." He hesitated only a second before nodding politely, assuming it was part of the ceremony. I returned to my place, into sitting as if nothing had changed. At the altar, the officiant lifted his hand slightly. "We are gathered here today to witness—" I met the technician's eyes across the room, and just before the final vows could be spoken, I gave the signal. The first sound wasn't Bianca's voice. It was a faint crackle through the speakers, the kind people assume is a microphone being adjusted. Guests shifted slightly in their seats, expecting the officiant to continue speaking. The choir at the back fell silent, confused by the interruption. Then the laughter filled the church, sharp, careless, unmistakable. Bianca's voice echoed through the sanctuary, clear enough that even the last row heard every word. "Evan is too easy. He doesn't question anything. He just trusts." A ripple moved through the crowd, not loud at first, on just a collective intake of breath. The officiant froze mid-sentence. Evan's hand slipped slightly from Bianca's as confusion flickered across his face. Sebastian stiffened near the aisle. The recording continued. "His mother is worth $150 million. Bianca's voice played, light and amused. "Once the marriage is official, it's only a matter of time before he gives me access." Gasps broke out across the room now, louder, sharper. Someone whispered, "Is that?" Another voice said, "Turn it off." But no one moved toward the speakers. Evan turned slowly toward me, eyes searching, disbelief mixing with something deeper. Hurt, maybe, or betrayal he didn't yet know how to name. The next part of the recording came through, Sebastian's voice unmistakable. "Debt doesn't wait forever. After the honeymoon, we start moving things." Bianca's smile faltered. She stepped back slightly, her eyes darting toward the sound system, then toward me. For the first time that day, she looked uncertain. "That's not—" she began, her voice trembling as she reached for Evan's arm. "Evan, this is taken out of context. Someone edited—" The speakers cut her off with the final line. "And the baby," Sebastian's recorded voice asked quietly. Silence fell over the room, heavy, suffocating. "1 month," Bianca's voice answered. "Nobody will notice yet." The recording ended. For a second, there was nothing. No music, no movement, just the sound of dozens of people breathing the same stunned air. Bianca shook her head quickly, stepping forward as if she could erase what had just happened. "This is a lie," she said loudly, turning toward the guests. "Or someone is trying to humiliate me. Mrs. Cynthia, you can't seriously believe this." "I don't need to believe it," I replied calmly from my seat. "Everyone just heard it." Her composure cracked for a brief second before she recovered, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Anyone can fake audio," she said, glancing toward Evan. "You know me. You know I would never—" Evan didn't answer. He stood perfectly still, staring at the floor as if the room had tilted beneath him. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched slowly at his sides. When he finally looked up, his gaze moved from Bianca to Sebastian, then to me. Not anger, not acceptance, just confusion too heavy to carry. Without a word, Evan stepped back from the altar. "Evan," Bianca whispered, reaching for him. He moved away before she could touch him. Guests shifted uneasily as he walked down the aisle, past rows of stunned faces, past the whispers that followed him, like shadows. He didn't look at me when he passed, didn't look at anyone. The doors at the back of the church opened, and he disappeared through them without choosing a side. Bianca turned toward the crowd again, desperation sharpening her voice. "He's overwhelmed," she said quickly. "Anyone would be after something like this. This is harassment. This is manipulation." Her words echoed hollowly against the silence. I stood slowly, my posture calm, unhurried. "If it's manipulation," I said evenly, "then the truth will clear you." Sebastian's chair scraped loudly against the floor. Heads turned just in time to see him moving quickly toward the side exit, his face tight, eyes avoiding everyone. And a few guests stood instinctively blocking his path, but he slipped past them with a practiced ease. "Security!" someone called from near the entrance. But by the time two ushers reached the doors, Sebastian was already gone. The sanctuary buzzed with rising chaos. Voices overlapping, guests pulling out their phones, Bianca standing at the altar with her veil trembling slightly around her shoulders. She forced another smile, trying to regain control, but the room no longer belonged to her. I watched quietly as the reality settled over everyone. The ceremony wasn't paused. It was finished. And somewhere beyond those doors, my son was walking away from a future he no longer recognized, while the man who had helped build the lie vanished before anyone could stop him. The parking lot behind the church was quieter than the sanctuary, but the silence felt heavier. Evan stood near the edge of the pavement, his jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened like he had forgotten what to do with his hands. Guests passed at a distance, whispering, pretending not to stare. I waited until the crowd thinned before walking toward him. He heard my footsteps before he saw me. "You should have told me," he said without turning around. His voice wasn't loud. That made it worse. "I needed you to see it for yourself," I replied gently. He turned then, eyes red but steady. "No, you needed to be right." His jaw tightened. "You humiliated her. You humiliated me in front of everyone." The words landed harder than anger ever could. For a moment, I let them sit between us. Evan had always been slow to judge people he loved. It was one of his best qualities, and one of the things Bianca had clearly relied on. "I didn't do that to hurt you," I said. "I did it because you were walking into something you didn't understand." "You don't know that," he snapped. "Audio can be edited. People can lie. And you," he shook his head, struggling for the right words, "you've never liked her. Maybe you just wanted a reason." I watched him carefully, noticing the way his hands trembled slightly despite the confidence in his tone. "I didn't act on a feeling," I said quietly. "I acted on evidence." He laughed bitterly. "Evidence?" His eyes flicked toward the church doors. "You destroyed a wedding based on a voice recording and assumptions." "I protected you," I answered. The words only made him angrier. "So protected me from what?" he demanded. "From loving someone? From making my own choices?" His voice lowered, exhaustion creeping in. "You always think you know what's best, Mom. Maybe I just wanted one day that wasn't controlled." The distance between us grew heavier than any physical space. Before I could answer, footsteps approached from behind. Reese stopped a few feet away, glancing between us like he had walked into a storm he didn't want to interrupt. "Evan," he said carefully, "we need to talk." Evan exhaled sharply. "Not now." "It has to be now," Reese insisted, his voice firm but calm. He looked at me briefly, then back at Evan. "There are things you don't know about Bianca." Evan's shoulders stiffened. "You too?" he muttered. "I thought you were done trying to convince me she was a mistake." Reese shook his head. "Well, I stayed quiet because you asked me to. But I've seen things. The way she pushed for details about your investments, the way Sebastian kept asking about your business trips. And last month..." He hesitated. "I overheard her on a call talking about timelines. Not wedding timelines. Financial ones." Evan looked away, conflicted. "You're just repeating rumors." "I wish I was," Reese replied softly. The wind moved through the parking lot, carrying the faint sound of guests leaving the building behind us. Evan's gaze shifted between the two of us, searching for something solid to hold on to. "I don't know who to believe anymore," he said quietly. That was the first honest thing he had said since walking out of the church. "You don't have to believe anyone right now," I told him gently. Just don't ignore what's in front of you." He said nothing. After a moment, he turned away and walked toward his car, stopping only long enough to glance back once, not at me, but at the church behind us. Then he drove off. Reese stayed beside me, silent for a while. "He's shaken," he said finally, "but he'll start asking questions soon." "I know," I replied. Inside my purse, my phone vibrated once, a quiet reminder that the world kept moving even when emotions felt frozen. I stepped aside, dialing a number I had memorized years ago, but rarely used. The call connected quickly. "I need discretion," I said calmly when the voice on the other end answered, "and I need answers fast." A brief pause. "Of course, Mrs. Cynthia," the investigator replied. "Miss, where do we begin?" I looked toward the church doors where Bianca's laughter had once filled the air. "We begin," I said quietly, "with Sebastian, and every secret they thought nobody would find." 3 days after the wedding collapsed, the silence around my house felt different. Not peaceful, focused. The private investigator sent the first report just after sunrise. I read it alone at the long table in my study, a cup of tea growing cold beside me as each page revealed another layer I hadn't yet seen. Sebastian wasn't just careless with money. He was drowning in it. Unpaid business loans stretched across several years, some small enough to hide quietly, others large enough to leave a trail in public records, civil suits filed by former partners. In a failed investment firm that had closed abruptly under financial restructuring, a phrase polite enough to mask collapse. Creditors had attempted legal action more than once, but settlements kept pushing consequences further into the future, until now. I flipped through the pages slowly, noting dates, amounts, and patterns. The debts had spiked sharply about 8 months ago. Around the same time, Bianca began appearing more frequently in Evan's life. It wasn't coincidence. It was timing. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the investigator. "There's more. Check the attachment." This file wasn't financial. It was personal. Bianca's estranged mother had been located in a quiet coastal town, far from the circles Bianca moved in now. According to the report, she had cut off contact years ago, or shortly after her divorce from Sebastian. A brief summary of a recorded conversation sat beneath the investigator's notes. I read it twice. Her mother had confirmed what few people outside the family knew. The relationship between Bianca and Sebastian had crossed boundaries long before the wedding was ever planned. The scandal had fractured their home, ending a marriage and leaving Bianca's mother unwilling to speak to her daughter again. She had moved away deliberately, refusing to be part of anything connected to them. The report didn't dramatize it. It didn't need to. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. Betrayal always sounds louder when spoken in public, but in private, it often arrives quietly. Like a truth that has been waiting patiently for someone willing to look. But a soft knock at the study door pulled me back. Reese stepped inside cautiously. "Evan hasn't answered my calls," he said. "I thought maybe he reached out to you." He hasn't, I replied, but he will when he's ready. Reese noticed the papers spread across the table and hesitated. Is that them? Yes, I said simply. He didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer them yet. Some truths take time to land properly. After he left, I returned to the report, scrolling to the final section the investigator had flagged, timeline analysis. The document laid out Bianca's relationship milestones beside Sebastian's financial history, a pattern so precise it almost felt rehearsed. The moment Sebastian's largest loan defaulted, Bianca began pressing Evan about joint investments. 2 months later, she encouraged him to speed up the engagement. We're 3 weeks before the wedding. She attempted to discuss account access and future financial planning under the guise of building a shared life. None of it looked romantic when placed side by side with debt deadlines. It looked calculated. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the weight of it settle. Every choice Bianca made had moved toward one destination. Not love, not partnership, but timing. A wedding aligned perfectly with financial pressure, as if she had measured Evan's future against Sebastian's survival. My phone rang again. "Mrs. Cynthia," the investigator said quietly, "we've confirmed something else." Messages between Bianca and Sebastian indicate they were tracking the wedding date against creditor negotiations. It appears she wanted the marriage finalized before certain debts became legally enforceable. I exhaled slowly. And so the wedding wasn't just convenient. "No," he replied. "It was scheduled." I ended the call and stared at the folder in front of me. This wasn't chaos. It was a plan. And for the first time since the ceremony ended, I realized just how carefully Bianca had built it. Not around love, but around deadlines, money, and opportunity. I closed the file gently, already knowing the next steps would change everything Evan believed about the woman he almost married. Because the deeper we looked, the clearer it became that the wedding date itself had never been about commitment. It had been about timing the perfect moment to take everything from him. The house felt unfamiliar without wedding noise filling it. Evan stood in the middle of the kitchen long after sunset, staring at a space that only days earlier had felt like the beginning of a new life. Half-unpacked gifts still sat near the wall. A bouquet of flowers had begun to wilt beside the sink. Nothing looked broken, and yet everything felt wrong. He opened a cabinet absent-mindedly, searching for nothing in particular. That was when he saw it. Amid a small glass bottle tucked behind a row of spices, placed too deliberately to be accidental. It didn't belong to him. He knew every item in that kitchen. He had chosen most of it himself. The label was unfamiliar, partially peeled at the edges. The contents a pale liquid that reflected the overhead light strangely. For a moment, he told himself it was harmless. A supplement. Something Bianca might have bought without mentioning. Still, a quiet unease settled in his chest. He picked it up carefully, turning it in his hand. The cap was sealed tight. No smell escaped. Nothing about it looked dramatic, which somehow made it more unsettling. Evan placed it back on the counter and stepped away, pacing once across the room before grabbing his phone. "Hey," he said when the call connected. "Are you still at the clinic?" His friend on the other end, a doctor he had known since college, answered calmly. "Yeah, what's going on?" "I need you to look at something," Evan said. "Probably nothing, but I don't want to guess." 20 minutes later, he walked into the quiet back office of the clinic, the bottle wrapped in a plain cloth inside his jacket pocket. The waiting room lights felt too bright, too clinical, amplifying every doubt he had tried to ignore since the wedding. His friend examined the bottle without touching it directly, reading the faded text on the label. The room grew quieter with each passing second. "You said this was in your kitchen?" the doctor asked. "Yeah," Evan replied. "Bianca must have left it there." The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not going to speculate about intentions," he said. "But this isn't something people normally keep around food. It's dangerous if used the wrong way. Evan's throat tightened. Dangerous how? Enough that you shouldn't have it near anything you eat or drink, his friend said gently. I'll run proper testing to be sure, but from what I can see, it's toxic. The word hung in the air heavier than anything else that had happened that week. Toxic. Evan sat back slowly, staring at the bottle as if it might explain itself. His first instinct was denial. 1,000 reasons rushing through his mind to make sense of it. Maybe Bianca bought it for something unrelated. Maybe it belonged to someone else. Maybe... But the recording from the church replayed faintly in his memory. Laughter, plans, timelines. And now this. And he rubbed his face with both hands, exhaling slowly. I don't understand, he murmured. His friend placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to understand everything tonight, he said quietly. Just don't ignore what you're seeing. Evan nodded, though the motion felt heavy. He left the clinic with the bottle sealed safely in an evidence bag, the cool night air hitting his face like a wake-up call he hadn't asked for. For the first time since the wedding, he didn't feel angry. He felt uncertain. The drive to his mother's house was longer than usual, every streetlight reflecting off the windshield like questions he couldn't answer. He replayed their last conversation in his head. The accusations, the distance, the way he had walked away convinced she had ruined everything. Now, he wasn't so sure. Cynthia opened the door before he could knock. She didn't look surprised to see him standing there, shoulders tense, eyes tired. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I'm not here to argue, Evan said finally. She stepped aside, letting him walk in without a word. He didn't apologize, didn't explain. He simply sat across from her at the dining table, placing the sealed bag gently between them. I need to know what you know, he said quietly. Cynthia studied him for a long second, not with triumph, not with judgment, but with patience. And for the first time since the ceremony ended. Evan wasn't defending Bianca anymore. He was listening. The folder arrived just before noon. No dramatic envelope. No urgent call. Just a quiet message from the investigator letting me know the next report had been uploaded. I opened it slowly, unaware that every new page had been peeling back a layer of something Evan wasn't ready to fully face yet. He sat across from me at the dining table, silent, watching the way my eyes moved as I read. The first section confirmed what I had suspected the moment I heard that conversation behind the church wall. Medical records, carefully sourced and verified, indicated Bianca was pregnant. Not by my son. The timeline didn't match Evan's relationship with her. The dates aligned instead with Sebastian's movements, travel records, and private communications that had already begun to surface during the investigation. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the weight of it settle before sliding the tablet across the table toward Evan. He read slowly. His expression didn't explode into anger. It collapsed inward, quiet, heavy. The kind of hurt that doesn't make noise. He set the tablet down without a word, staring at his hands like he was trying to recognize them. There's more, I said gently. The next file opened into a collection of spreadsheets. At first glance, they looked like normal financial planning. Columns, projections, timelines. But the deeper I scrolled, the clearer their intention became. Notes about access points to Evan's investment accounts, estimated values of his business holdings, lists labeled post-marriage restructuring, with timelines stretching exactly 1 year into the future. 1 year, enough time to build legal claims, shared assets, and leverage. Evan's jaw tightened as he read. They planned this, he said quietly. Yes, I answered, long before the wedding. He pushed back from the table, pacing once across the room. I gave her everything except passwords, he muttered. I thought that meant I was being careful. You were careful, I said. You just trusted the wrong person. His phone vibrated against the table. Bianca's name flashed across the screen. He didn't answer. A message appeared seconds later. "Evan, please talk to me. This is all a misunderstanding." Another followed. "Your mother is manipulating you." Then another. "I love you. Don't let her ruin us." Evan stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. He turned it face down without responding. "She's been calling since yesterday," he said quietly. "I kept thinking maybe there was an explanation." He didn't finish the sentence. Outside, the afternoon light shifted across the room, turning everything softer, calmer. Inside, the truth felt sharper with every minute. "I need to make a call," I said. Evan looked up. "About what?" "Protection," I replied simply. He watched as I stepped into my study, closing the door halfway behind me. The attorney answered on the second ring, his tone already professional, already prepared. "I want temporary safeguards placed on Evan's accounts," I said, quietly. "No public filings unless absolutely necessary." "Understood," he replied. "Any specific concerns?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Attempted financial exploitation. I want every access point reviewed and restricted until further notice." The paperwork began moving immediately. Electronic signatures, legal language designed to shield without escalating conflict publicly. Within an hour, the safeguards were in place. Bianca wouldn't know right away, but any attempt to move money, request access, nor create shared financial claims would now be flagged automatically. When I returned to the dining room, Evan looked up from his phone. "Was that the lawyer?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded slowly, absorbing what that meant. Not punishment, not revenge, protection. Bianca's messages continued to light up his screen, one after another. Apologies, accusations, promises. He didn't respond to any of them. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I thought I knew the life we were building," he said quietly. I met his eyes gently. "You did," I replied. "You just didn't realize you weren't the one designing it." Outside, the world moved normally. Cars passing, people living ordinary days. Inside the house, a different kind of future had just begun to take shape. Because while Bianca kept trying to reach him, she had no idea that every financial door she planned to walk through had just been quietly closed. The first official letter arrived on a gray morning. It wasn't dramatic, just a sealed envelope marked with the insignia of a legal office. But the weight of it felt heavier than anything that had come before. I opened it at the dining table while Evan watched from across the room, his expression quieter than it had been in days. "Formal notice," I said after scanning the first page. "Sebastian's creditors have filed complaints, multiple parties." Evan leaned forward slightly. "About what?" "Fraud risk," I answered. "Financial misrepresentation and possible conspiracy." The investigation that had started quietly in private was no longer staying behind closed doors. Within hours, more calls followed. Attorneys requesting documentation, financial analysts asking for transaction histories. Every new development pulled Bianca and Sebastian's actions into a clearer legal light. What had once sounded like whispered plans behind a church wall now looked like a structured attempt to exploit access to Evan's assets. Reese stopped by later that afternoon, his usual calm replaced with visible tension. "I just heard from someone at the firm," he said, setting his keys down. "Sebastian's name is all over internal reports. Creditors aren't waiting anymore." "They won't," I replied. "Deadlines create pressure. Pressure creates mistakes." Evan listened quietly, absorbing everything without interrupting. The anger he once carried had faded into something heavier, understanding. Then Bianca's lawyer called. Where the message was polite but pointed, Bianca intended to pursue a civil claim against me for emotional distress and reputational damage caused by the wedding interruption. According to her statement, the recording had humiliated her publicly and cost her professional opportunities. Evan's eyes widened when I relayed it. "She's blaming you?" "She's protecting herself," I said calmly. That's different. A formal letter followed soon after, language carefully crafted to suggest that Bianca had been unfairly targeted, that the recording had been misrepresented, that her reputation had suffered because of a decision made without warning. Evan shook his head slowly. She's still acting like this is about appearances. It always was, I replied. Later that evening, my attorney arrived with a stack of documents, or he spread them across the table. Financial charts, communication logs, timelines linking Bianca and Sebastian's planning to Evan's upcoming marriage. They've underestimated how much evidence exists, he said quietly. Creditors have already provided records showing Sebastian was negotiating debt extensions tied directly to the wedding date. That alone raises serious questions. And Bianca's claim? Evan asked. It won't hold if prosecutors decide there was intent to exploit, the attorney replied. Civil arguments lose strength when criminal elements enter the picture. The room grew quiet as he slid one final document toward me, a preliminary notice from investigators reviewing the case. It wasn't an official charge yet, but it showed something more significant. And they were looking at the situation not just as a personal betrayal, but as a potential financial conspiracy. Evan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. I never thought it would reach this level. Most people don't, I said gently, until truth meets paperwork. Outside, evening settled over the house, shadows stretching across the floor. Bianca's messages had stopped for the day, replaced instead by statements issued through her lawyer, each one attempting to shift attention away from the growing evidence. Hours later, my phone rang again. The investigator's voice was quieter than usual. Mrs. Cynthia, prosecutors have reviewed the latest files. They've found communications suggesting Bianca and Sebastian discussed gaining legal leverage over Evan's finances shortly after marriage. Not just speculation, actual planning. I closed my eyes briefly. So it's no longer just suspicion. No, he replied. They're calling it attempted financial exploitation. I ended the call and looked across the room at Evan. He watched my face carefully, reading the answer before I spoke. The law is involved now, I said softly. He nodded once, slow and steady. Not surprised, just tired. Because somewhere beyond the walls of our home, the story had shifted from a broken wedding to something much larger. And for the first time, there was proof that what happened behind that church wall wasn't just betrayal, it was a crime waiting to be named. The house felt quieter than usual that evening, not empty, just calmer, like the storm had moved further away but hadn't disappeared completely. Evan sat on the back patio staring out at the garden lights, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside him. I watched from the doorway for a moment before stepping outside. Reese was already there, leaning against the railing, his expression thoughtful. I owe you an explanation, he said, breaking the silence before either of us spoke. Evan didn't look at him right away. About what? About why I stopped warning you, Reese replied. The words hung in the air. He ran a hand across the back of his neck, a small, nervous gesture I had rarely seen from him. I saw things early, he continued quietly. The way Bianca asked about your finances, the way Sebastian hovered around your business conversations. I told you what I felt, but when you pushed back, I realized something. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There's a line between protecting someone and trying to control their choices. I didn't want to cross that line and lose you as a friend. Evan finally looked at him. So you just stopped? I stepped back, Reese corrected gently. I stayed close enough to help if things went wrong. I just stopped forcing you to see what you weren't ready to see. The honesty in his voice softened something in Evan's expression. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. I thought you didn't care, Evan admitted quietly. Reese shook his head. I cared enough to stay. The conversation settled into a quiet understanding. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. Trust doesn't rebuild in speeches. It rebuilds in moments where people choose to stay even when it would be easier to walk away. Inside the house, Clara moved through the kitchen, was setting out tea without interrupting us. She had always known how to make her presence feel calm rather than intrusive. When she stepped onto the patio, she simply placed the tray on the table and gave Evan a small, reassuring smile. "No pressure to talk," she said softly. "Just drink something warm." Evan returned the smile faintly, the first genuine one I had seen from him in days. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once and stepped back toward the doorway, leaving us space. There was no tension between them, no hint of anything beyond quiet support, just a familiarity built over years of working together under my roof. Later that evening, Evan followed me into my study. "I was hard on you," he said, his voice steady but low. "You were hurt," I replied. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "When I'm not ready to say everything you did was right," he admitted, "but I understand why you did it." It wasn't an apology. It didn't need to be. "Understanding is enough for now," I said gently. We sat together in silence for a moment, not as opponents, but as people beginning to stand on the same side again. Then my phone buzzed sharply against the desk. A news alert flashed across the screen. Local businesswoman accused of controlling son's life after wedding scandal. I opened the article slowly. Bianca's lawyer had issued a statement to the press, painting a carefully crafted picture. A powerful mother interfering with her son's happiness, manipulating a private moment for public humiliation. Anonymous sources described me as controlling, cold, incapable of letting Evan make his own decisions. Reese stepped closer, I reading over my shoulder. "She's trying to flip the narrative," he muttered. Evan's expression darkened as he scanned the headline. "She's turning you into the villain." I closed the article calmly, placing the phone back on the desk. "She's trying to survive," I said quietly, "and survival makes people loud." Outside, the night deepened, the house settling into silence again. But something had shifted. Evan didn't walk away from me this time. He stayed where he was, standing beside my chair, watching the way the story was beginning to change in public. Because while we were rebuilding trust quietly behind closed doors, Bianca had just stepped into the spotlight, reshaping the story in her own words. And this time, the battle wasn't only personal, it was public. The first official charge came just after sunrise, and I was in the kitchen when my attorney called, his voice unusually direct. "Sebastian has been formally charged," he said. "Fraud and conspiracy. The creditor's filings pushed the investigation faster than expected." Evan stood near the counter, watching my face as I listened. He didn't ask questions immediately. He had learned, slowly, that the truth revealed itself, piece by piece, and that rushing it only made it heavier. "What about Bianca?" I asked. "There's no criminal charge against her yet," my attorney replied carefully, "but financial records are linking her directly to planning discussions. Emails, shared documents, timelines tied to Evan's assets. She's no longer just a witness." I ended the call and turned toward Evan. "It's moving forward," I said quietly. "The law is involved now officially." He nodded once, and absorbing the weight of it without visible shock. The anger that once fueled him had shifted into something steadier. Acceptance, maybe, or simply exhaustion from learning too much too quickly. Later that day, the news broke publicly. Headlines changed tone overnight. The narrative Bianca's lawyer had tried to build, the image of a controlling mother ruining a wedding, began to fracture under the weight of legal documents. Articles mentioned debt investigations, suspicious timelines, and prosecutors reviewing evidence of attempted financial exploitation. Reese sent a message almost immediately. "You need to see this." Attached was a financial summary released as part of court filings. Charts outlined Sebastian's debts alongside projected access to Evan's investments after the wedding date. Bianca's name appeared repeatedly, not as a victim, not as a bystander, but as someone who had participated in conversations shaping the plan. Evan read the report silently, his shoulders sinking slightly. "She knew," he murmured. "She knew exactly what was happening." "Yes," I said gently. The collapse of her public image didn't happen loudly. It happened slowly. Sponsors distancing themselves, social invitations disappearing, acquaintances avoiding her name in conversations. Reputation, once cracked, rarely breaks all at once. It erodes piece by piece. Clara stopped by that evening with updated documents from the legal team. She placed them neatly on my desk without comment, her presence calm as always. Evan thanked her quietly and she gave him a small nod before stepping back, leaving us to process the next wave of reality. By nightfall, another update arrived from the investigator. Bianca had met with her lawyer privately after learning about Sebastian's charges. According to the report, she had become visibly shaken when prosecutors requested medical verification connected to the case, information that could clarify timelines surrounding the relationship and the pregnancy. I closed the file slowly. "Something's changed," I said. Evan looked up. "What do you mean?" "She thought she could control the story," I replied. "But proof doesn't bend easily." Outside, the lights of the city flickered against the windows, reflections shifting across the room like quiet reminders of how quickly a life can turn. Bianca's lawyer released another statement late that night, softer this time, less confident, filled with careful wording that avoided direct denial. Because somewhere behind the scenes, Bianca had realized the truth. The pregnancy she once believed would remain hidden could now become evidence, not of love, not of circumstance, but of planning that reached far deeper than anyone had imagined. And once that truth stepped into the courtroom, nothing she built would be able to hide behind silence anymore. Courtrooms don't feel dramatic the way people imagine. There was no shouting, no sudden confessions, just quiet movement, papers sliding across polished desks, attorneys speaking in measured tones, the steady voice of a judge who had heard too many stories to be impressed by theatrics. Sebastian sat at the defense table, shoulders rigid, his confidence worn down by weeks of evidence stacking against him. The charges weren't built on emotion. They were built on numbers, debts, like communications, timelines that prosecutors laid out piece by piece until the pattern became impossible to ignore. Fraud, conspiracy, financial misrepresentation. The prosecutor didn't need to raise his voice. He simply walked through the facts. Creditor agreements tied to the wedding date, messages discussing asset access, and financial projections that assumed Evan's resources would soon be within reach. Sebastian's attorney tried to argue desperation, poor judgment, misunderstanding, but desperation doesn't erase intent. When the judge finally spoke, the room held its breath. "Based on the evidence presented," he said steadily, "the court finds sufficient grounds for sentencing under financial fraud statutes." The words fell without drama, just finality. Sebastian received a multi-year prison sentence, not exaggerated, not theatrical, but long enough to end whatever illusion of control he once carried. The judge noted the calculated nature of the scheme and the risk posed to financial stability, emphasizing that planning alone was enough to justify consequences. Sebastian didn't look toward Bianca when the decision was read. He stared forward, expression hollow. Bianca's case unfolded differently. Prosecutors reviewed her involvement carefully, but stopped short of criminal charges. The evidence showed participation in planning, manipulation of access, and clear financial intent, but not enough to meet the threshold for imprisonment. Instead, civil court moved swiftly. Financial judgments were issued, assets tied to Bianca's accounts, including gifts, investments, and certain shared holdings linked to the planned marriage were frozen and later forfeited through settlement agreements. Legal fees mounted quickly, sponsorship contracts dissolved. Her lawyer negotiated relentlessly, but the outcome was unavoidable. No jail time, but financial ruin. The judge's final remarks were precise. Civil penalties reflect participation in actions that attempted to exploit another party's financial position. The court finds sufficient evidence to justify restitution and asset forfeiture. There was no applause, no dramatic reaction, just quiet consequences settling into place. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, cameras poised. Bianca exited with her lawyer, face pale but composed, refusing to answer questions. Headlines would later describe it as a fall from grace, but standing there, watching from a distance, I felt no triumph, only a strange stillness. Reese stood beside Evan, hands in his pockets, offering silent support. Clara waited near the car, calm as always, giving Evan space to process what he had just witnessed. We drove home quietly. That evening, Evan lingered in the doorway of my study long after everyone else had settled into their own thoughts. The house felt different now, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Justice rarely feels loud. It feels final. He stepped inside slowly. "I watched everything today," he said. "I know," I replied gently. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't come easily. The distance between us, built over weeks of doubt and anger, seemed smaller now, though not entirely gone. "I said things to you after the wedding," he began, then stopped. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "I thought you were trying to control my life. I thought you wanted to prove me wrong." I waited. His voice softened. "I was wrong." The apology didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, in the way he met my eyes without defensiveness, in the way his shoulders finally relaxed after carrying too much for too long. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. The words hung between us, not dramatic, not loud, just honest, and for the first time since the laughter behind that church wall. My son wasn't standing across from me. He was standing beside me again. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been for weeks, not the heavy silence that comes after conflict, but a softer one, steady and calm, like something had finally settled into its rightful place. I sat at my desk reviewing a stack of charity proposals that had been waiting for my attention long before the wedding chaos began. Life had a way of moving forward even when emotions lagged behind. Revenge didn't feel the way people imagined. There was no thrill, no triumphant speech echoing in my head, just clarity. When I thought back to that moment behind the church wall, Bianca laughing, Sebastian encouraging her, I realized something I hadn't understood at the time. I hadn't exposed them to hurt them. I had done it because silence would have cost my son more than humiliation ever could. Protection, not punishment. That was what it had always been. A soft knock came at the door. Clara stepped inside carrying a folder of updated schedules. She moved with the same calm presence she had shown throughout everything. Never dramatic, never intrusive, just steady. "I've reorganized next week's meetings," she said, placing the folder on my desk. "Thought you might want to ease back into work slowly." "Thank you," I replied, glancing at the notes she had written neatly along the margins. Her attention to detail never demanded recognition, yet it carried a quiet strength that made difficult days feel manageable. She gave a small nod and left the room without lingering. Later that afternoon, Reese arrived with news updates from the courthouse. Sebastian had begun serving his sentence. The process formal, procedural, stripped of the arrogance he once carried. There were no dramatic scenes, just paperwork and doors closing behind him. Bianca's situation unfolded differently. According to public records, she had given birth quietly at a private clinic weeks after the trial ended. No announcements, no celebrations, Just a short note filed through her legal team, confirming medical leave from ongoing civil proceedings. Her life had shifted away from the spotlight she once chased, replaced by a quieter reality shaped by consequences she could no longer outrun. Evan listened to the update without interrupting, his expression thoughtful rather than bitter. "I don't hate her," he said quietly after a long pause. "I just don't recognize who she was anymore." I nodded. Sometimes the hardest part isn't losing someone. It's realizing they were never who you believed. That evening, the three of us sat on the back patio as the sky dimmed into soft shades of blue. Reese left early, offering Evan a quiet pat on the shoulder before heading out. Clara lingered near the garden lights, adjusting a lantern that had flickered out. Evan stepped closer to help her. "You didn't have to stay through all this," he said gently. She shrugged lightly. "I didn't stay because I had to," she replied. "I stayed because people deserve support when their world shifts." There was no romance in the air, just a moment of understanding that felt different from anything I had seen between him and Bianca. No pressure, no performance, just two people standing in the same quiet space, sharing the weight of recent months. He smiled faintly, softer than before. "You always know what to say." "Not always," she said, returning the smile. "Just when it matters." I watched from a distance, not interfering, not guiding, simply observing how naturally their conversation flowed. And the future didn't need to rush itself. Some connections grow slowly, rooted in trust rather than intensity. The night settled around us, calm and steady, and as I closed my laptop, I realized something unexpected. Revenge hadn't felt like victory, it had felt like relief, the quiet knowledge that truth had done exactly what it needed to do, protect the people I loved without turning me into someone I didn't recognize. Across the patio, Evan and Clara stood under the soft glow of the lantern light, sharing a quiet laugh that carried no pressure, no expectation, just possibility. And for the first time since everything began, the future didn't feel like a battle waiting to happen. It felt open. Time didn't rush forward after the trial. It moved quietly, in small, ordinary moments that slowly rebuilt what had been shaken. Evan returned to work gradually, spending more time at the office than he had in months. The noise surrounding the scandal faded little by little, replaced by routine and the steady rhythm of normal life. And through it all, Clara remained exactly who she had always been: present, reliable, calm. One afternoon, Evan stood outside my office watching her organize a stack of documents for an upcoming meeting. She moved through the room with quiet efficiency, pausing to answer calls, making sure every detail was handled before anyone needed to ask. It wasn't dramatic, but it was consistent, something he had begun to notice more clearly now that chaos had settled. "You've been doing this for years, haven't you?" he asked as she handed him a file. She looked up, slightly surprised by the question. "Working here?" "Yes," she said with a soft smile. "Your mother built something worth protecting. I just try to help keep it steady." He nodded slowly, remembering moments he had once overlooked. The way she stayed late to finish projects, the way she quietly made space for people without drawing attention to herself. Loyalty, he realized, didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it showed up every day without asking for recognition. Their conversations grew longer after that. Not sudden confessions or dramatic shifts, just shared walks to the parking lot after work, quiet lunches that felt easy instead of heavy. Evan found himself talking more freely around her, not because she pushed him to, but because she listened without trying to reshape his thoughts. One evening, I watched them from across the conference room as they reviewed schedules together, and their laughter was soft, natural, nothing like the forced perfection I had seen at the wedding that never happened. There was no urgency between them, only patience. I chose not to interfere. For the first time since everything began, I stepped back deliberately. allowing Evan to make his own decisions without guidance or caution. Protection had its place, but growth required space, and he needed to discover for himself what genuine connection felt like. Weeks passed quietly. Reese noticed it too, teasing Evan gently during a late dinner at the house. "You look lighter," he said, "like you're finally breathing again." Evan smiled faintly, glancing toward the kitchen where Clara stood, helping me set the table. "I think I am," he admitted. There was no dramatic confession that night, just a quiet understanding that something had shifted, not out of necessity, but out of time and trust. Later, as guests left and the house grew still, Evan approached me in the study. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about everything, about what matters now." I listened without interrupting. He hesitated, then continued. "Clara and we've been spending more time together. It's different this time. There's no pressure, no rush, just honesty." I met his eyes, offering only a gentle nod. "That sounds healthy." He smiled, relieved that I wasn't guiding or questioning. "We're not trying to replace anything," he added. "We're just letting things grow." "That's exactly how it should be," I said. A few days later, Clara stopped by my office with a small folder. Nothing formal, just notes written in her careful handwriting. "Evan asked me to help plan something small," she said softly. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Small?" She nodded, her expression warm but calm. "Private, quiet, just close friends and family." The meaning settled in slowly. Not a grand ceremony, not a public display meant to prove anything. A new beginning built on steadiness rather than spectacle. I watched her leave the room, a quiet smile forming as I realized how different this felt from the chaos that had come before, because this time, nothing was being rushed, and somewhere between quiet conversations and steady trust, a new wedding was being planned, one that didn't need to convince anyone it was real. The second wedding didn't begin with music. It began with silence, the good kind. No cameras waiting outside, no crowded guest list designed to impress strangers. Just a small garden behind a quiet estate, chairs arranged in a simple semicircle, sunlight falling gently across the grass. The air carried none of the tension that once filled a church sanctuary months earlier. This time, nothing felt forced. Evan stood beneath a small archway decorated with white flowers, his posture calm in a way I had never seen before. Not nervous, not trying to prove anything, just present. Clara walked toward him slowly, her smile soft, her steps steady. There was no dramatic entrance, only sincerity. The people gathered around them weren't watching for spectacle. They were witnessing something that had grown quietly, patiently, out of trust instead of urgency. I sat in the front row, hands folded loosely, feeling a kind of peace that didn't need to announce itself. Life had changed in ways none of us could have predicted. Sebastian's sentencing had concluded weeks earlier. The court confirmed a multi-year prison term for fraud and conspiracy. Not exaggerated, not symbolic, but firm enough to close the chapter he had tried to control for so long. The arrogance he once carried faded behind courtroom doors, replaced by the stillness of consequences that couldn't be negotiated away. Bianca's outcome unfolded differently. Civil judgment stripped away much of what she had built publicly. Financial penalties, legal fees, and reputational collapse, leaving her isolated from the circles she once moved through so easily. No dramatic downfall, just a slow unraveling. Invitations stopped. Partnerships ended. She faded from headlines not because people forgot, but because there was nothing left to gain from her story. I didn't celebrate any of it. Justice had happened, and that was enough. The ceremony in front of me moved gently forward. Evan's voice, when he spoke his vows, sounded grounded, not the hopeful innocence he carried before, but something deeper. Experience had reshaped him without hardening him. Clara answered with the same quiet certainty she had always carried, her words simple but steady. There were no grand promises meant to impress a crowd, just honesty spoken between two people who had learned the cost of trust and chosen it anyway. Reese stood nearby, smiling like a man who had waited a long time to see his friend finally at ease. When the officiant announced them married, the applause that followed felt warm, genuine, a sound that came from relief rather than excitement. Later, as guests shared a small meal under soft lantern light, I stepped aside to watch the scene from a distance. Evan laughed easily with Clara, his shoulders lighter, his eyes clear. The tension that once defined him had softened into something steadier. Resilience. He wasn't trying to erase the past. He was building something new beside it. Clara noticed me watching and walked over quietly. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked gently. "For trusting him to find his own way," she replied. I smiled faintly. He always had it in him. He just needed time to see clearly. News about me had changed too. The same headlines that once painted me as controlling had shifted tone after the trial concluded. Articles described composure, foresight, protection. People who once kept their distance began reaching out again, not out of fear, but respect. I wasn't the villain Bianca had tried to create. I was simply a mother who refused to stay silent when silence would have destroyed her child. As the evening settled into quiet laughter and soft conversation, I realized something important. Peace didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived slowly, in repaired relationships, in truths spoken calmly, in the absence of chaos. Revenge had never been the goal. Protection had been. And watching my son step into a life built on genuine loyalty instead of illusion felt like the only victory that mattered. Evan and Clara walked toward me hand in hand before the night ended, both smiling with a quiet confidence that needed no explanation. I hugged them gently, when feeling the warmth of a future that no longer felt fragile. The lantern lights flickered softly above us as guests began to leave, the garden returning to stillness. I looked at my son, not as someone I needed to guard anymore, but as a man who had learned how to stand on truth without losing his kindness. And as the night closed around us, one thought settled clearly in my heart. They thought love made him weak. They never imagined it was truth that would make him free.